Trump is saying something again that's causing the Bitcoin price to crash right now. We're seeing another mini crash because Donald Trump is bringing uncertainty to the market. We're going to take a look at what he said here. We also have the meeting between Michael Saylor, Eric, and Larry, who met here at Donald Trump's house. Could they possibly be talking about a strategic Bitcoin reserve? Let's take a look at what that's all about. But there is also positive news because Bitcoin is now selling off, but we still see that the big players, the institutional players, are continuing to, filling their pockets. BlackRock is now increasing its position in MicroStrategy, and it looks like only the weekends are getting shaken off here. So here's another warning. Don't let any political things get to you. Just because Donald Trump makes certain statements here, you must not become weak. And now, don't just panic sell your Bitcoin. You really need to pay close attention to what's going on right now because we're now seeing a distinction between the weak hands and the strong hands. Bitcoin was actually back above the $100,000 mark again. And I don't know how many times I've heard the saying, Bitcoin will never go below $100,000 again. I've definitely thrown that saying out there too. Of course, because we're all feeling bullish. But I think it's already been 6, 7, or 8 times or so. I don't know exactly how much, but Bitcoin has certainly exceeded 100,000 at least 5 times. It rose above the $100,000 mark, only to break back down again. We were already at 106,000, 105,000. Sometimes we go up to 101, 102, 103. Sometimes we just barely go over the 100,000 mark. But we're currently breaking down again and again. And a few times it was Donald Trump. And now it's Donald Trump again who's causing panic. President Trump announces that next week he will impose reciprocal tariffs on many countries, including countries that trade with the United States. And that ultimately means it's bringing uncertainty into the market. You don't know if this will have a positive or negative effect on the market. And how is this whole tariff situation going to play out? We have seen in the past that the market simply does not cope well with uncertainty, especially when it comes to the customs issue. And every time Donald Trump says something about tariffs, whenever he made a statement, the market would initially crash. But then when Donald Trump reassured everyone that he was going to lift the tariffs or that they weren't going to be as bad as initially thought, the market would bounce back really quickly. So we can definitely say that Donald Trump can pump up the Bitcoin price. We've also seen a Trump pump here and there, especially after the elections and so on. We're not just seeing Trump pumps, but we're also seeing these mini Trump thrashers. Of course, these aren't really concerning things, so you shouldn't let yourself get too panicked. We're also going to take a look at the positive things, why it actually looks very, very promising in the long run. And that ultimately means there are really great opportunities to buy Bitcoin at a lower price. And what we can take away from this is that it could happen pretty quickly that we see a rebound back up. We've seen that before where Donald Trump caused a sell-off. As soon as the panic was out of the market and there was more stability, there was a pretty solid rebound back up. Then theoretically, you'd be back at the same level you were at before this mini crash. Well, how random is that? I'm recording a video right now. What are they doing there? Over there? Video shoot or something like that? Well, totally random. Now we need to go to a different spot because they're starting to play music here. Otherwise, it's going to get too loud. And what's also interesting is that it's not just Bitcoin that took a hit. Of course, the general markets have also taken a hit. The S&P 500 has dropped by 70 points, which is almost 1%. Here. Since Donald Trump basically said that. And we can definitely still see the correlation to the traditional markets. That means when the traditional markets crash, Bitcoin also crashes along with them. I mean, we have now also seen the other side of Donald Trump. He wants to launch his own Bitcoin ETF. A lot of people commented below when I made that video. Why should I buy a Bitcoin ETF from Donald Trump if I can also buy an IBIT Bitcoin ETF? And that's a very, very valid question. I mean, for most people, the Donald Trump product probably doesn't make much sense here. And it seems that relatively small amounts are expected here. So somehow around $250 million or something like that is supposed to be accumulated through these kinds of products, as far as I understand it. That's obviously a joke compared to the BlackRock products. But I'll say it again, the signal is definitely there that Donald Trump is potentially open to it for crypto, for Bitcoin, and stuff like that. And now there are short-term interruptions here because of all the customs issues. It will ultimately show whether this is good or bad for the USA. I've mentioned before that I find the whole customs situation pretty critical, because as a Bitcoin supporter, you should really be for free markets, for open trade, and so on. And then in the end, customs. These are basically socialist experiments or socialist interventions that should be viewed critically. And then there was actually something else that really unsettled the markets here. Here it says from Nick Timiaros, who always has very, very good information about the Federal Reserve and all the interest rate decisions happening there. He says here that inflation expectations for the coming year rose from 3.3% last month, the highest since November 2023, and marking 2 consecutive months of unusually large increases. This is only the 5th time in 14 years that we've seen such a big jump, 1 percentage point or more, in inflation expectations for the coming year within a single month. So you can see that the sentiment in the market is really fluctuating a lot. And the market is currently very, very uncertain, and there's volatility in the inflation expectations. And that's basically the next uncertainty we have in the market. We don't know how inflation is going to go from here. The Federal Reserve recently said, yes, Jerome Powell, yeah. Inflation, everything under control and all that. And we'll be looking at how this all develops month by month. Simple. Yeah, we pretty much have it under control and all that, but those are always the official statements. In the end, you can see that they don't really have it all under control. You could already see it a bit at the last Fed meeting where they didn't really lower the interest rates, and you could tell, okay, maybe inflation isn't quite under control yet. And then there was basically speculation that there might not be any interest rate cuts coming at all. Yeah, that suggests that you don't necessarily want to push interest rates all the way down, because otherwise you end up with the problem that inflation gets even more heated up. So that's basically the next bearish sign we have here. If inflation comes back, then you obviously can't lower interest rates. And then you end up with the problem that there's a lack of liquidity in the market. And a lack of liquidity in the market basically means that we might not see Bitcoin prices rising as much. And we have to take all of that into account right now. Consider that there's a lot of macro uncertainty right now. Inflation, tariffs, and stuff like that. And that also means that Bitcoin will probably remain very, very volatile in the near future, even though it will rise in the long term. Then there's the counterpoint from Donald Trump, who clearly says he wants to lower interest rates, screw inflation. He also says he wants to talk to Jerome Powell about it. Jerome Powell says he doesn't think that's so great. He hasn't had any direct contact with Donald Trump yet. Jerome Powell was also brought up at the last Fed meeting. He was asked how things are going with his relationship with Donald Trump, how he sees it himself. Jerome Powell apparently wants to defend inflation here. Donald Trump wants a strong economy. He naturally wants to be seen as a strong politician who can pump up Bitcoin and the stock markets, and that ultimately contradicts current Federal Reserve policy. And if we now have heightened inflation expectations, it's probably going to please Donald Trump even less. And then we had something very, very interesting here. The meeting posted here by Michael Saylor, I already shared that yesterday, where Donald Trump's house is basically occupied now. Now we see that Donald Trump apparently didn't meet with Michael Saylor, but with Eric Trump. Michael Saylor never meets directly with Donald Trump. Instead, he always meets either with Eric Trump or with people from the Trump team. But here's the question. A lot of people were speculating yesterday about what they were talking about, right? This was some kind of charity event. Of course, that could be the case, but this is just about some kind of charity story. But from what I know about Michael Saylor, he pretty much uses every second to orange pill people. A lot of people are now assuming that he might have gone through different Bitcoin cases with Eric Trump. I mean, Eric Trump has now said it's a good time to buy Bitcoin. Michael Saylor buys the tops, he buys the bottoms. So Michael Saylor is basically always buying one. That's definitely interesting, that they're already in communication. And if Michael Saylor is in communication with Eric Trump, then for sure, Eric Trump is also probably in communication with Donald Trump. And Michael Saylor will probably pitch again why a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the US is essential, very, very important. But like I said, that's all speculation. You can't really know what it was all about. But potentially, these are bullish signs long-term because things are being set up that could pump Bitcoin up. It's really, really crazy that we now have politicians like Eric Trump, or not politicians, but big personalities like Eric Trump who want to pump up the Bitcoin price. But we also have to mention that there are a lot of shitcoin stories going on here. So Eric Trump is not just saying to buy Bitcoin, he's also saying to buy Ethereum, and in the end, they're also selling you some meme coins. We have the Donald Trump meme coin, the Melania coin, and so on, even though we still don't know if Donald Trump is involved in this. And that has led to a lot of uncertainty in the market. That means Donald Trump is really the one who can definitely pump the markets up, but he's also causing a lot of volatility right now. It almost seems like the top trading indicator right now is just Donald Trump, what he posts here on Twitter, what he's doing here, and the entire stock market reacts to that. But it's also understandable because the US is really the one setting the pace here. What's happening in the US is the key. And what's happening in Europe with the ECB and so on is pretty irrelevant, even if they're raising or lowering interest rates or whatever. Nobody really cares. But what's also really, really important to take away from this is, and that's basically what I said at the beginning. That means a lot of weekend sellers are out there, but the big fish are still buying in. We see here that BlackRock has now increased its MicroStrategy holdings again. They had 4.09% here in September and have raised it again to almost 1%. We're now at 5%. And that basically shows that BlackRock is still betting on Bitcoin. Here with the leveraged strategy, you really have to be very, very convinced if you're going to bet on MicroStrategy, even though you have to say that BlackRock is just buying up everything. That means they also have a very, very wide, diversified portfolio. That means that it is always the case when, for example, some big players somehow get into Bitcoin, either via MicroStrategy or whatever. Then on the one hand, you can of course say, wow, they are now massively keen on Bitcoin, just like the Norwegian state builder. But on the other hand, you can also look at it this way. They just have a very, very broad, diversified portfolios. And when they have 3 to 4% of MicroStrategy shares, then that's just part of the bigger picture. So we shouldn't overrate everything here. And then we actually have Matt Hugin here, who is also the CEO of Bitwise, or maybe I think he's from Bitwise, the ETF issuer. He basically says that there is currently a massive discrepancy between the sentiment in retail and that of professional investors in the crypto space. And that's ultimately very, very important for you to take away. If you take away one thing from the video, it's exactly this. He goes on to say that the sentiment in retail is as bad as it's been in years. Not anymore, while professional investors are extremely optimistic. It's like we're living in two completely separate worlds. And that's such a bold statement right there. And I can just confirm that. That means the retailers. First of all, they're not even here yet. They're totally missing the boat. I don't know what they're doing. The kids are just doing their thing. Now you're looking at the big players, the ones with real money, and they're starting to get it. Okay, so a 2% Bitcoin allocation is essential because the risk-reward ratio for Bitcoin is massively good here. That this is a once-in-a-century opportunity to build massive wealth. And in the end, it's the same if, for example, you don't have any money. Then there is Bitcoin, and let's say, okay, building wealth, but then let's say your investment case is not dependent on it. But if you have a lot of money, if you have a lot of assets to manage, then you basically have to adopt Bitcoin, because if you don't, sooner or later, you will become poorer compared to the people who have Bitcoin. So yeah, Bitcoin is important for poor people and for rich people, but maybe even more for rich people, because in the end, poor people have nothing to lose. They can only win. They can buy Bitcoin and potentially gain from it. But rich people, they can lose everything. Any rich person who isn't betting on Bitcoin right now could potentially lose it all. And in the end, that's the important message you need to take away from this. I don't know if it's because the institutional players are leaning more towards Bitcoin. There are probably other reasons too, like the Larry Fink effect or something, where rich people are just looking at what BlackRock is doing, what Larry Fink is doing, what the big players are doing, what Donald Trump is doing, what Michael Saylor is doing. And if they stop buying, or rather Michael Saylor doesn't really have that much appeal, maybe with the Bitcoin community. But especially when Larry Fink stands up and says, hey, Bitcoin is the flight to quality. We're investing in Bitcoin. We're expanding our Bitcoin offerings. Now there are the in-kind ETFs that might be coming soon from BlackRock. And if the halt here is the signal to the outside world, then the other classic investors will look and say, okay, what is Larry Fink doing? He's buying Bitcoin, then I guess I'll buy Bitcoin too. And that could ultimately be one reason why institutional players are so keen on Bitcoin. And with the retailers, somehow, I don't know, some influencer, an influencer like Larry Gaga or some other well-known people would have to start here. In order to advertise Bitcoin, all the retailers would probably get involved too, because that's the issue. Most people aren't sovereign people. They don't buy because they're somehow, what do I know, here. They don't really understand the investment thesis of Bitcoin. They just do it because their neighbor says, okay, I just bought Bitcoin. And when some influencer says, okay, I just bought Bitcoin, then they'll jump in. And in the investment world, we now have influencers, Larry Fink and so on. And maybe the influencers are still missing in the retail world. I don't know, that's just one possibility. For sure, if you want to buy Bitcoin, I'll drop a link down below. 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin with the code Bitcoin. Absolutely recommend it. And folks, tonight is the live call for Bitcoin Advantage, where I'll be introducing Bitcoin Advantage for the first time. If you're not on board yet, join the waitlist down below. Then you'll definitely be part of the live call. Only those on the waitlist can definitely participate. See you soon. See you later. Let me know if you panicked and sold everything or not. Peace out.